Want to start? We're recording the meeting now, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So that we can have it for posterity. But Andrew, I'd like to, well, first of all, I would just like to say that I'm Penny Gower and I'm chairing this meeting. I'm the EIS FELA branch secretary and part of the national executive of FE. I'm disabled myself. I've got cerebral palsy, although those who know me know I'm not one of the 75% who are in wheelchairs with a startle reflex. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm also a TEC tutor who delivers Disability Champions courses to reps, because it's amazing, but work places, the employer thinks they've done the accessibility thing if you just put in a ramp and a disabled toilet. Well, only 3% of disabled people actually are in wheelchairs needing a ramp and a disabled toilet. And there are so many other ways, as today actually has demonstrated, in which accessibility has to be thought through and is led by, and we've seen it today, is led by the people with the impairments that require the accessibilities. We are not disabled because of physical or other impairments. We are disabled by a society that does not cope or intend to cope with architectural issues, with parents who are perhaps a little bit overprotective, as it was in my situation, and don't have any expectations of their children, and so on. So it's society that disables us. We just have a variety of impairments that either enrich our lives or cause us problems at various times. But first of all, I've got great pleasure in welcoming Professor Andrew Watterson, who's in the Faculty of Health Sciences and is going to speak on a zero approach to COVID for both disabled and abled colleagues. Thank you. Andrew, do you want to take it away?
Thank you. I probably won't press the share screen. I don't know if somebody could put up the PowerPoint. I wouldn't want to lose things at this stage. So if it happens your end, that would be useful. It's just a few PowerPoint slides.
Who has the PowerPoint?
Well, I sent them to Ian. I don't know if
I mean, if anybody wants to send it to me, I can share it.
Des has had it, hasn't he?
Oh, I never got it.
All right.
It was sent to you guys this afternoon. I'll send it on, Sophia. I've got it. I'll send it to you right now. Right.
Yeah, Ian asked me to talk about the impact of long COVID and how it tied in with the zero COVID approach. So there's quite a lot going on at the moment, obviously, about long COVID. In terms of the effects, the WHO just recently produced a policy brief on this, which you'll see in a moment on the PowerPoint. And today there was also a statement from the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health looking at, for instance, COVID and firefighters. And they were picking up the point very specifically that stress actually was an added complication with regard to COVID, particularly in terms of working long hours and having physically strenuous work. No sign of the PowerPoint.
I'm sorry, Donnie, it has arrived without the PowerPoint. I don't know why.
It'll be below. If you keep going down to the bottom, you'll find it. Or I can share it from my end if necessary.
It's not there. So do you want to try to share it from there?
Hang on, yeah. I can see it at the bottom, but it's not coming up. This is terrible. Technology nightmare.
One of the worst lessons you've ever delivered in your life.
Terrible. Okay, I'll try and find it. If you just carry on, Andrew,
yeah.
I'll do my best.
So,
just talk it through.
So the World Health Organization was identifying some of the problems associated with long COVID. And when you look at them, obviously they would compound the risks that exist for other groups. So the standard things being about fatigue, about headaches, particularly about chest pain, muscle pain, forgetfulness, shortness of breath, and so on. So if you're thinking about respiratory problems, if you're thinking about neurological problems, if you're thinking about people with heart disease, they're all going to be much more vulnerable in the context of COVID. So what we need to look at then, I think, is the sort of issues that will exist. And these relate to the sort of double jeopardy argument, I think, you know, as in you may be exposed to a range of factors. There we go. Okay, that's great. So slideshow probably. Yeah. So slideshow at the top. Is that?
Where are we? Sorry.
Up at the top, yeah. Slideshow.
Slideshow.
That's it. You got it. Yeah. Play from start.
Play from
the front. Go to the left.
Yeah.
To play from start. Yes. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Okay.
Right. So on to the second one. So we're looking at what the effects might be for a range of disabled workers. What's important at the moment is how, for instance, those workers may be affected, but also when they're affected, what happens. And literally this week, we've seen statements from the Industrial Injuries Advisory Committee, which advises about prescribed diseases. And it's not even recognising long COVID at the moment. It recognises that there could be double the risk for a whole group of workers. And I think disabled workers and some able-bodied workers would be a particular risk there. But we're not seeing any government recognition that long COVID is a prescribed occupational disease. I don't know if Erin is still with us or not, Julie is. Others will be talking about some of the issues about the mental health and some of the physical health problems. But of course, shielding is going to be an issue. How we deal with vaccination is going to be a big issue. What sort of support people have is a big issue. And underpinning that, of course, the best thing to do is to work on the prevention strategies. Next slide, please. So we've got the Scottish workforce there. Within the workforce, there are going to be disabled workers. They are going to be affected. They have been affected by COVID. Also, there'll be workers who at the moment are fit and well, who when they get hit by COVID, because of long COVID, are themselves going to run into major difficulties. And we know that 1 in 10 people are affected by long COVID. After 12 weeks, the effects are still there. So a back of the envelope calculation might be that we're talking about thousands of workers in Scotland who will be affected. I mean, the figure we've got at the moment after testing is something like over 200,000 tested positive. Some will be asymptomatic, some won't get the problems, but many will. So disabled workers, as I say, are in the double jeopardy category there, because they're going to be hit by the disease, and then they will have other things on top of that. And there may be very vulnerable workers in there that the government attempts to recognise in terms of its vaccination strategy. Next slide, please. So what we've got are approaches to dealing with that. And iSage, the independent SAGE, which you can look up online, has got the key things to do there. So we're looking at what sort of support that there might be. So obviously it's about getting good data, creating national registers of patients who are affected and indeed who may be vulnerable, ensuring that the health professionals who deal with them have got the appropriate guidance in terms of delivering care. And inevitably, yes, you know, we need more research, but actually we need action at the moment, like recognising the disease and like introducing effective preventative strategies. Next slide, please. So that's where the zero COVID approach comes in. And the idea of that isn't to eradicate COVID. If only we could, that would be wonderful. But I think there's a general recognition we can't. People like Philippa Whitford talk about zero COVID tolerance. So what we need to be doing is driving it down. And that's where the elimination strategy comes in. And you can't separate off what goes on in the community and what goes on in the workplace. So again, disabled workers are going to be outside the workplace and in it. Able-bodied workers will be in the same position as well. So the focus should be, the primary aim should be eliminate, that's drive it down as low as you can by appropriate means that would link in with testing and tracing, yes, but would link in far more with preventing the spread in workplaces. And that may link in with working from home, which I think Julie's going to talk about. So making workplaces safe is the key thing. And the sort of strategy that the Society of Occupational Medicine's recommended there was you have a view that no deaths are acceptable. And that seems to be the way forward. But that's not going to happen unless we get a significant increase in monitoring and improved national control measures. So we get a lot of talk about reasonable mitigation from the Scottish Government. That's not enough to protect workers of any category in any group. And it will mean looking very closely, not just at the workplace provisions, but travel restrictions, safer schools, and working from home. The travel restrictions are probably going to be the big ones that are looming in terms of quarantine. And of course, it'll be vaccinating, and the sort of issues there may be that various groups will not be able to be vaccinated, and they may therefore run additional risks, and how do we deal with them? So there's things that should have been thought about very early on in terms of vulnerable workers that haven't been. But there is a strategy there with zero COVID. And if we get a responsive government, both within Scotland and at UK level, should be possible to protect disabled workers better and prevent workers currently becoming disabled because of being exposed to COVID. Thanks.
Is that you?
That's me, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'll propose that we go straight on to Julie, if that's all right with Julie. And I'll take the other speaker if she's able to join us. I don't know if anybody's got her contact details so that she can be sent the login details to see if we can bring her back in. But in the meantime, we would welcome Julie with profuse apologies for the mess up earlier on. We've learned our lesson and it will never happen again. But thank you, Julie. And Julie is she's Julie Ferguson, and she's chair of the STUC Disabled Workers Committee, and is intending to speak on the impact of physical disabilities when staying in the workplace and when working from home. Julie, thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Before I start talking about my topic, I'll just point out that I have Erin's email, and I've actually forwarded the email so that she can try to get into the meeting. So fingers crossed she'll turn up shortly. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to come to speak here. As Penny said, I'm the chair of the STUC Disabled Workers Committee, but I also work as a science teacher in Orkney. So rather unusually, I'm a deafblind science teacher. Because of the job I have, I've been experiencing working in the workplace during the pandemic, and I've also been working from home. So I've had to switch between the two situations. And for any disabled person, the major thing that you have to consider is accessibility, because our lives revolve around accessibility. Without that, we cannot do anything in the same way as other people. And we're not looking to access things in exactly the same way as other people, because that doesn't work for our disabilities. What we're looking for is an alternative way to get to the same goals as everybody else. And that's really important. If you're disabled, you'll know from experience that it's sometimes very hard to get the accessibility to happen and to request reasonable adjustment that you're legally entitled to through the Equality Act. Something that we're all familiar with is the struggle to request reasonable adjustment to help us fulfill our work role better, with less fatigue, with more support, and just generally feel valued in our workplace and worthy of being there. Because when people refuse to give you reasonable adjustment, they're saying that you shouldn't be there. The problem with the COVID pandemic is that this has led to a complete and utter change in our working environment. Because if you stay in the workplace, you've got to follow the facts. You've got your face covering. You've got to avoid, and I wrote that in slightly small. Yep, you've got to avoid crowds. I can't avoid my pupils. You have to clean your hands. I'm constantly reminding my pupils to clean their hands because this is not something they think about. They might think about it when they go to the toilet, but I'm starting to wonder. But I've got to tell them, wash your hands when they come in the room. Wash your hands when you leave the room. Wash your hands, you've just touched your face mask. We also have to remember to, I wrote this far too small, the 2 meter distance, yeah. And if you're a blind person, and I'm not totally blind, but I'm registered blind, it's actually very difficult to maintain a 2 meter distance when you don't know where the people are. And it's very difficult to listen for where they are when you're also deaf at the same time. So it's been an interesting experience. The requirement for face masks means that I can't lip read. And I have to be able to lip read. And in order to access this meeting here, I've got video on so that I can lip read. I've got the sound so that I can get that information, and I've asked for caption. And I need all of those things to understand what's happening. And in my classroom, this is suddenly something, a major part of my accessibility has been removed because we have to for health reasons. The problem on a larger scale, we've all needed to reassess our reasonable adjustment. We've all needed, sometimes people have had to ask for new reasonable adjustment when they've never said to their boss before, I have a disability. Because COVID affects people with disabilities to a far greater extent than any other group of people. So sometimes we've had to disclose our disability when we haven't before, and other times we're having to request more or different reasonable adjustment. And when that's already difficult and people are sort of flapping about going, what do we do? It's really hard to get those. With other workplaces, my workplace hasn't been doing the furlough system, but with other workplaces, when furloughs happen, that means that yes, you get to stay at home, but you're on 80% of your salary. And for some disabled people, that actually means that we're now going to be in poverty as a result of that. Theoretically, we still have a job, but we're not earning enough money anymore. And disabled people are more likely to be on a lower salary than any other group of people, if we're lucky enough to manage to get a job in the first place. So those are sort of issues that are surrounding being in the workplace and trying to maintain our job normally, but also during a pandemic. The recommendation is that where possible, you work from home. And this brings in a whole new set of problems, because those of you who have been working from home won't already know this. Where do you set up your work equipment? If you've got specialised work equipment, is that going to fit into the space that another person could fit the normal equipment? If you need a standing desk and you need a comfortable chair and it's in a particular design, is that going to fit into the wee corner of your sitting room that you've managed to free up because you're living in a house of 5 people? Do you have children? Do you have caring responsibilities? Because all of those things are going to impact on you as well. And with the reasonable adjustment, if you had reasonable adjustments at work, you're going to need them at home as well. Because if your home becomes your workplace, the reasonable adjustment come with you. And another issue that I've had from members in my union is that employers would not come into the house to set up the reasonable adjustment, to set up the accessible workstation, because it wasn't essential. Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, but if you want someone to do their job, it's essential to give them the tools to do their job. So switching back and forth has been an interesting source of stress for myself, and I know that other people are dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety as well. We have a fear, a very valid fear of catching COVID and then hopefully recovering from it or developing long COVID. And there's so many negative things that have happened in this past year, but I'd actually like to finish up with a positive note, because a really good boss makes a massive difference. And in this past year, I have come to appreciate my line manager far more than I did before. I've always appreciated him, but this is the man who every time something has changed, he has sat down, he's thought about it, he tried to anticipate how that's going to impact me, and then he comes to talk to me and discusses that with me. And he puts forward what he thinks, I put forward what I think, and we come to an agreement. I've learned that bosses like that are gold dust, because I'm talking to other people and they're struggling to get the support they need. And I know that I will get the support I need from my boss. On a more general positive thing, I feel that disabled people have been able to make many more links with each other online, simply looking through Twitter, on Facebook, support groups, being able to do video meetings like this. All of a sudden, we have got access to meetings anywhere in Scotland, and we do not have to worry about travel. We do not have to worry about the food that we eat. We do not have to worry about actually being able to get upstairs or sitting around a table where you can't actually hear people. We don't have to worry about the money that it costs because we need to bring a carer with us. We can set it up from home or from our work office. And that's a big thing that I want to see continue, actually. This is a massive improvement. And for myself, again, video meeting accessibility, because before the COVID pandemic started, things did not have subtitles. There were no captions to turn on, and now we have captions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. That was fantastic. Okay, so we don't have the third speaker. So I'd like to throw it open and then we can revert to the third speaker if she's able to join us. So if you can put your hands up the old-fashioned way with your hand up, or you can use your electronic hand that you will get in participants or reactions. Kathy and then Don.
Hi, thank you so much for that. I wanted to ask a question, which, I mean, Carmen will know about this as well, that we've been asked in our union branch. We have quite a lot of social care workers in our branch. And one of the questions has been asked about clear masks. So masks that will allow lip reading. And what we found is, I mean, I think that the worker who raised it has found quite good clear ones on the web. But the HSE and the Scottish Government don't seem to have an approved clear mask, which seems to be a real problem. I don't know whether you have anything that you could feed us in about that.
Can I suggest that the speakers, we just take the discussion and then you come in if it's possible? Is that all right? Or if you prefer to answer the questions, if it's easier for you, then we can do that. But
for myself, it's probably easier to answer questions as they come up, because otherwise I'm listening and trying to remember what the questions are for a longer period.
Yeah, Julie, you flag up anytime you want to come in. And Andrew, if you don't mind coming in at the end to sum up any of the points that you hear, if that's all right. Right, Julie.
Okay, thank you. The clear masking is something that's been mentioned to me, but I have not seen any successful versions of those, because unfortunately they have a tendency to get fogged up. And they develop quite a lot of the quite heavy condensation beyond the fogging. I would love to know which clear masks you've seen. But one of the problems I have as well is if we use those at my workplace, we would need to order in enough for a class set, and we would need to clean them in between classes unless we got them for each pupil that I teach individually, and I see about 120 pupils a week.
Okay,
My
thank you.
work is not going to pay that money.
No, they should, if it's what you need. If I could ask Kathy to put her hand down, so I don't think she wants to immediately come back. It's called legacy hands. Everybody's doing it. So don't worry about it. I've got Don, and then I've got Pete or Eileen. So.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about what the speakers think about the Scottish Government's current approach, which is that, and how much of it is electioneering and how much of it is really dangerous. Because one of the things there, I think they're saying that they're cancelling all shielding. I forget when, is it April 26th or something? Basically, everybody is equally at risk, which is completely nonsense. And they're basically reopening very fast. And so in terms of the zero COVID thing, are we looking at another, automatically another wave, or will vaccine head that off? Or so it's really about what the wisdom of the Scottish Government's current policies towards reopening. Thanks.
Thanks, Donny. And before I bring you in, Pete and Eileen, Stephen Miller's asked, what about face shields? So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in straight away on that one or hold that thought.
I can. This is like my mastermind topic here. So face shields, the problem with face shields is that they don't actually prevent aerosol transmission of COVID, and they don't prevent you from getting it if that is the only protection that you're wearing. So if you were wearing a face shield for proper protection, you would also need to wear a face mask.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you, Julie. Okay, Eileen or Pete or both?
Do you want us to answer the question?
No, I'll bring you in at the end if that's okay, so we can maximize the number of people that can speak.
Yeah.
At the end. Yeah, you're unmuted
It
now.
is Eileen. Thank you, Andrew, again for sort of bringing up the importance of long COVID. This is actually something I'm getting extraordinarily worried about. I've managed to get more worried between our meeting last week when we were discussing it and this week. It's quite correct that, you know, Julie said, if you've got a good boss, makes a lot of difference, but it's not just your immediate line manager, it's also the ethos of the place. And if the ethos is cut, no, we can't employ any more disabled people, and we're not making adjustments, you're out, basically. I was contacted by somebody this week who has actually won a not at my place, but in a similar situation, who has actually won a tribunal case on the issue of reasonable adjustments. He was basically told by his employer that advanced cancer treatment does not allow you to be qualified as disabled. No, we cannot actually make any adjustment for you. Please go. But he did turn to tribunal, and he's actually said, no, you can't do that. But immediately I thought of long COVID. And long COVID for people who are perfectly, who don't have any problems now is going to be bad. Getting it actually accepted, given the way employers have behaved over ME and things like that. But for anybody who is already, if you like, sort of health or ability disadvantaged, it's going to be awful. I think we're just going to have more and more employers just saying, phew, this is how I get rid of a few more people. Sorry about being negative, but after this week, I'm beginning to feel a bit that way. But thanks both of you for interesting talks.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I'd just like to follow on. I don't see any hands up this. Oh, I do. I'll bring Des in a second, but just to follow on from what Eileen said, it's amazing that has been won, but it's also amazing that a tribunal was necessary when any cancer is covered under the disability section of the Equality Act. So my goodness, are they trying to roll the world back? And to me, it just seems, this is my question, that the legal rights of disabled people have increased, quite substantially in the rewrite and the Equality Act. in direct proportion to how they've got worse in the outside world, with the loss of disability living allowance and isolation when you lose a bit of your income. Not to be able to get out is been, would have a significant impact on people's mental well-being as well as their physical well-being as well. So that just seems to be one of life's terrible ironies that I can't quite get my head around. But also, I would like to ask if anybody's had any experiences of making reasonable adjustments in the work, through our union activity, etc. Because where I've managed to get something done, like automatic door openers for somebody who was diagnosed with MS and was then having to use a wheelchair and didn't have the strength to open quite heavy doors. And this was at Lauder College in Fife. And, as luck would have it, she decided to leave her work, but it was quite expensive. But the college has now got these amazing doors that open. So if you're pregnant, if you've got children with you, if you're a student carrying books or a staff member, it's a more accessible place. And so my question is, how rich can a workplace be when we do take account of accessibilities? It's not something that takes it away from anybody else. It enriches the environment. So I just wondered if anybody else had that experience. But that was my question. But if I may, I'll take Des, because we are sort of running out of time, and I do want the speakers to be able to summarise the points. So I'll take Des, and then I'll take Ian. And put your hands up right now so I can see if anybody else has got a question. Des?
It's a question to Julie. She described quite well what is she meant by a supportive manager, and I just wondered, what would she say? How would she describe a supportive trade union rep or health and safety rep? I don't know, what is her experience of trade union reps and dealing with the sort of issues she's talked about? I'm just curious about what she would say in that regard.
May I hop in on that very, very briefly before we go to the next question?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I have actually been represented by trade union reps within my workplace to help me get reasonable adjustment, particularly after one situation where a reasonable adjustment had been granted and then removed a couple of years later. And the reason given for it was that I should remain in the meeting and just put up with it. So it's a longer story, but I'm also an equality rep myself. I'm a trained equality rep. So I've done this from the two different perspectives. And the major thing for a trade union rep is to listen and believe. Because if you don't feel like your rep believes what you're telling them about the way you're being treated, then you can't trust that rep to support you in the way that you're asking them to support you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So Des, is your hand up for another question, or are you okay with that?
Okay with that.
I've got Ian, and then I've got Kathy for Scottish Hazards, and then perhaps we'll start wrapping up if that's okay, and I'll take it to both speakers to sum up. So Ian first, and then Kathy.
Yeah, thanks, Penny. Apologies, Andy, because I missed your presentation, but I would like to ask you a question specifically about long COVID and the research that's being done and the medical on the medical effects of long COVID. I actually know I've got a friend who caught COVID last year. He has thankfully pulled through. I've also got my sister-in-law who is one of 14 cases in a special needs school who has been diagnosed with long COVID and has actually had 4 months off and just went back for a couple of hours today. But what I've actually read coming through both in scientific papers and in medical papers does not reflect the amount of attention that's went into finding a vaccine and how to actually cope with the long-term effects of long COVID. my mate who caught COVID last year he works for the NHS and hasn't even had any tests done on his lungs, for instance, and he does have underlying health conditions. As I say, he has pulled through and he's had both his vaccinations, but it's still worrying. And then there's a long-term effect on my sister-in-law who has got chronic asthma. Thanks, Penny.
Okay, thanks, Ian. And Kathy, and then we'll take Julie and then Andrew to sum up. Kathy?
Yeah, thank you. It was a question for Andrew, really, and it's just saying how depressing it is that the IIEC isn't recognising long COVID. Do you think that that's linked with the HSE refusing to call COVID a serious condition? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And just before I invite the speakers back, just to point out that EDINBURGH has put in a link to the clear mask, which might be of interest to people. So if you want to copy that off the chat before the meeting ends, that would be a good idea. So Julie first, if there's anything else that you'd like to add, and then I'll leave it with Andrew to sum up.
If you don't mind, I'd actually like to ask Andrew to speak first, because I've had a few things to say during the question session, so if he'd like to take some time to speak himself.
Absolutely, we're disabled led and we're listening and we're learning. Andrew.
Yeah, okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, I particularly took note of what Julie was saying, by the way, about the socioeconomic circumstances of people with disabilities. And all along the line, everybody is flagging up that there are going to be these very vulnerable groups. So this is your double, treble jeopardy issue. You know, what you're doing outside the workplace, what you're doing in it, and the sort of setup that you've got, you know, your wages, conditions, hours, and so on. And I'll come back to that in a moment in terms of the Industrial Injuries Advisory Committee. I think somebody was raising the very important question about where do we stand with the Scottish Government in terms of advocating an end to shielding, and are we going too fast? I would recommend you have a look at the Zero COVID and the Independent SAGE web pages, because they've been looking in some detail at this, and we get the constant references to reasonable action being taken to protect school teachers, to protect workers who've got to go to work, and other groups of workers. But in fact, what we want to see is increased mitigation. What we want to see are much better controls. And again, some of the things that Julie was talking about there with very vulnerable groups, clearly more can be done, and in good workplaces, things are being done. So I think we're going to run into difficulties. If you just monitor the local newspapers, you'll see very significant numbers of clusters in schools, of staff and of children. But the Scottish Government seems to be indicating that isn't really a problem. So we've got this mismatch between quite a lot of the evidence and what's happening there. In terms of the question about long COVID and research, Ian, again, I would recommend that you have a look at Independent SAGE, which has laid out the fact that there should be much more research going on, and there needs to be more support for clinicians, and we need to have a better database. And I think your point is well made, that a lot of money can be sloshed around, not just for vaccinations, which I think is very important, but if you look at the money sloshed around for test and trace and all the privatised activities there that have been wasted, that sort of money really should have gone into looking at those workers who've been affected. And we're a year in, and that is quite a long time, I think, for us to have planned and to have done rather more than we have done. Kathy's question in terms of the ratings, as I say, the world's been turned on its head. The Industrial Injuries Advisory Committee said generally, we've got to show double the risk to workers of a disease. And then they produce a report which shows double the risk to workers of the disease and doesn't do anything about it. They didn't link it to the health and safety executive categorization of COVID as significant but not serious. And if you recall, that categorization linked into the fact that they said that long COVID wasn't serious. You know, I mean, it's just that absurd. More is coming out about this. I would again recommend you have a look at Hazards magazine, which is going to give you a very detailed analysis of how they've categorized the various groups and how SARS and MERS and COVID have in a number of respects been treated differently. So I think it's part of another picture how the health and safety executives made that category. There's no excuse whatsoever for the Industrial Injuries Advisory Committee not prescribing long COVID. 7 other countries have done it. The parliamentary all-party group called for its recognition. We're behind the curve, and it's the people who are most vulnerable who will be clobbered, you know. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Andrew. That was brilliant. Thank you. And last but very much not least, Julie.
Okay. Scottish Government. I'm trying to, I'm sort of like, what do I say here? I mean, they're going to end shielding, they're shifting through raising some of the, sorry, my brain is just stopped working right now. Give me a moment to get my thoughts into gear. Right. Shielding. An aspect that worries me about lifting the various restrictions in the next few weeks is my personal preference would be that restrictions are lifted and then we pause, and then some more are lifted and then we pause, because that means that we've got 2 or 3 weeks where we can actually take a look. Is this affecting things? Is this pushing the infection rates up? Is this pushing hospitalisation up? And we can react to that. If we do too much at once, then yes, I am concerned. And it's going to have to be monitored very closely. I get the impression that Independence is going to be keeping a close eye on that. Is that correct, Andrew?
Sorry, yes, I think so.
Mm-hmm. So it's not a group that I'm very familiar with, I'm afraid, which is why I wanted to check with you. But yeah, shielding is... The problem with shielding as well is, if you've been shielding for the past year, how difficult is it going to be for you to trust and walk out of your house and go back to doing all of your old things again? Because nobody's talking about the mental health aspect of the isolation of sitting in your house, being scared of talking to anybody that's been somewhere outside of your house. And that's something we're going to be dealing with, the mental health repercussions of this, of COVID in general, and long COVID, and shielding for a very long time. And this is something that mental health is not funded enough in Scotland at the moment. It's very difficult for people to access the support, and with the increase in the need for that support, it's essential. But something that I'm looking at in my own mind is, with people with long COVID, if you already have a disability, you have a certain amount of resilience and you might be able to adapt to a change in that, especially if you have a changeable condition in the first place. But someone who's been healthy for 30, 40 years and then suddenly comes down with COVID, I'm going to tell you now, when you come down, when you're diagnosed with a serious condition or disability, the NHS does not actually counsel you about how to handle that. They basically go, this is the condition that you have, this is what might happen next, it's serious, bye-bye, we'll see you next year. And I think we need to be looking at long COVID patients in terms of we've got to support not just the physical aspect, but the mental aspect. It's going to be a very difficult situation for them. I am sure that there were a couple of other questions that I've not touched on. Can someone remind me what they were, please?
About whether the legal rights of disabled people, why have they reduced, why have they increased when in reality disabled people are worse off, and how enriched does a workplace become for able people when you fight for accessibility for disabled people?
Yes. We are increasing in legal rights, but what we're looking at is also a very strange backlash on the other side of that, where, and I'm going to blame this on the Tory government, and I'm going to blame this on the daily newspapers who basically say disabled people are scroungers, they're getting all this money and they're not actually that disabled. And so while yes, we're getting more rights, we're also being pushed back by people from getting those rights because they're sort of like, you can't actually be that bad. And this is something that I deal with myself in my day-to-day life because I am literally registered blind. I have a certificate that I can get out of my my file box and show you. But when I say this to people, people are like, you're not that bad. You don't walk into the doors. And I was like, I don't walk into the doors because I've got a white stick. Why are you trying to tell me that I'm not as disabled as I say I am? And this is something that we're constantly dealing with. And this actually brings me back to long COVID. Everything comes back to long COVID in my brain right now. Long COVID concerns me from another perspective, not just in mental health, but the fact that there's a lot in common with ME and chronic fatigue syndrome. And anyone who has those conditions will know that the medical support is absolutely appalling. And when you've got a new condition that has things in common with that, I am not convinced that the treatment and the support and the advice is going to be as good as it should be, because for the last however many decades, people with ME and chronic fatigue syndrome have been told that they're imagining it. It takes years, sometimes decades, to actually get a diagnosis. They're not supported in what they need. They push themselves too hard because they're being told that they've got to go and do exercise every day to fight the fact that that pushes them back. And we're going to see the same thing for long COVID. So this is something that concerns me as well. With accessibility, for being able to bring in new accessibility in workplaces and things, it's a massively positive thing. And something that I've actually learned this past year is a lot of the things that have been put in place that's allowed so many of us to work from home is actually stuff that was put in place to help disabled people. There's a lot of technology that's being used to help people in everyday life who wouldn't normally need this because disabled people needed it first. How can you say that's not a benefit? Yeah. A bit of a rambly sum up, but there you go.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both speakers, and you have given us, Julie, an object lesson in never ever launching a Zoom meeting without having captions ready and willing. So that is something which we will take back as educators, and people in our networks will learn from that. So thank you so much for your forbearance. And everybody.
I appreciate the fact that you've managed to, that you persevered until you got it to work. And I think, is that Sophia that was working on that? So my thanks to Sophia for getting that working.
Thank you to everybody, because we would have persevered, I can assure you, when that was going to happen. We were going to find a way. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending. And we will see you at the next TUC COVID Action Committee as well. But thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation, folks.